Hello everyone, and welcome to an extremely wild and creative game from the 2018 US Championship between Fabiano Caruana and Varuzhan Akobian. It's interesting, this game Akobian goes for the French defense, and Akobian is known to be a French defense specialist. Also, Lenderman in round 2 was also known to be a French specialist, but that didn't really help him against Fabiano. So let's see how Akobian does. In the game we have e4. E6, D4, and D5. So the French defense is on the board, and as usual, I did prepare some interesting statistics, but only after the game. Knight to C3, and now not for the first time, but in a very long time, we have a variation that is not the winner, Knight to F6, the classical variation of the French. E5, Steinitz variation, advancing the pawn, Knight to D7, and now F4. C5, we have Knight to F3, Bishop to E7, and Bishop to E3. Knight to C6, Queen to D2, preparing queenside castle, B6, and Bishop to B5 now, attacking the knight as it's undefended on C6. Queen to C7, defending the knight, also developing the queen. We have queenside castle and A6. A6 was the first move that took some time to consider. I believe it was some 7 minutes to decide on this move, but it doesn't mean that this is not in Akobian's preparation. It could also mean that, like Botvinnik, he enjoys thinking about moves that he already prepared, but who knows. We have A6 attacking the bishop, bishop captures on C6, queen captures, and F5 now. F5 is a very nice pawn advance, going for that very strong French center, and it's not a pawn sacrifice. If you capture this pawn captures on F5, then the D5 pawn becomes undefended. Simply capture on C5, and after bishop captures, now this pawn is very weak, attacked 3 times, simply knight d4, bishop captures, queen captures, and there's really no way to defend this pawn. And this would be an excellent position for white. So after F5, we have C4, locking down the center, and here it took Fabi some 30 minutes to decide on his next move. He did ponder on a lot of things. He did consider bishop to G5, but then after bishop to F8, he couldn't really find any way to continue this for white. If pawn captures, queen captures, that's alright for black. So after considering this position for half an hour, he found this move that could be in today's modern chess considered to be a tall move. He played F6. F6 is a clean pawn sacrifice that doesn't really give white anything other than the promise of an interesting game. Of course, Tal used to give up his pieces and his queen just for the promise of an interesting game, but in modern chess, even a nice pawn sacrifice could be considered a Tal move. So G captures on F6, and it's interesting. Fabi took over around half an hour. I believe it's 29 minutes and 50 seconds, something like that, to play F6, and it took Akobian less than 1 minute to accept this. So he knew that Fabi was going for the initiative, that he didn't really have anything. He simply grabbed the pawn. We have pawn captures on F6, and here Akobian did consider for about 2.5 minutes whether he will capture the pawn or move back the bishop. If you move back with the bishop, then that's a very annoying pawn on F6. Obviously you want to capture it, and he did capture it. You don't want to capture with the knight and allow knight to E5, attacks the queen, and then white has enough time to regroup. This would be excellent for white. So bishop captures on F6, and now again, Fabi did consider a lot of things. He thought about bishop to G5, but after bishop captures, queen captures, he thought that white didn't really have any resources left on the king side. Black can simply continue B5, B4, and white doesn't have a way to prevent this. So after this bishop captures on F6, he found another interesting move, rook H to F1. Why not? Knight to E5 will always be an idea in the future. This bishop could become undefended on F6. Let's use this. And again, while playing rook H to F1, he said that if you play bishop to B7 here, only then will he continue bishop to G5. And after bishop captures, knight captures, now there's a double attack on the F7 pawn, and it's hard for black to find a move here. And of course, if you play something like F6, then knight captures, you can never capture with the queen because rook comes here. You have to block, and after pawn captures, you can't even capture back because simply rook captures. Queen captures, rook e1. This loses the queen, and even if you do have 2 rooks for the queen, both of the rooks are undeveloped. Black has to move his king, and then white has the next move. It's a better position for white, probably even winning. So after this, rook h to f1, b5 was played. Akobian pretends like nothing is happening. He's preparing to push b4. Here Fabi played queen to f2, and now there are really some terrible threats on the board. Knight to e5 will become a great threat. This will attack the queen, the knight that is defending the bishop on f6. If the bishop moves, the f7 pawn will come under attack, as there's a queen-rook battery on the f-file. And here b4 was played. b4, Fabi didn't really like this move from Akobian, but there really wasn't a better move, and b4 is the engine's favorite, so Akobian proceeds well. And it's interesting that here Fabi did consider knight e5, but he didn't like knight e5 because bishop captures on e5. Of course, if knight captures, then you get queen captures on f6, the rook is attacked, the knight is attacked. If the knight moves, the f7 pawn is attacked. So you don't want to capture with the knight, you want to capture with the bishop. And after queen captures on f7 with check, king moves, now knight captures on d5, this would be forced, threatening checkmate on e7, pawn captures, and now pawn captures on e5. Rook to f8, queen captures on h7, rook captures, and Fabi said that he couldn't find any sort of a forced win here. White is better here, of course, but he's down a piece, and if you can't find a forced win, there's really no reason to go into this. Black is undeveloped on the queen side, and maybe white could pull off something here, but he couldn't find it. So after b4, he retreated with the knight to e2, and this could be this could be one example of a position where Ivanchuk's famous saying, the hardest move to find is with the knight back, doesn't really fly. Because here Fabi did play knight to e2, and the knight to e2 is a great move, but he had the even stronger knight to e4, which is another piece sacrifice, but the one Fabi didn't consider. The idea is now that after pawn captures knight, now you play knight to e5, attack the queen, the knight, and everything. And now after bishop captures, queen captures on f7 check, king to d8, but now you have d captures on e5, and this opens up the d file. So now black has to react to this, king to c7, getting the king out of the way, but now rook to d6 is coming. And after we move the queen, rook f to d1, you double up on the d file. There are so many threats here. Queen captures on e6, bishop will later be able to threaten king on b6. Black really doesn't have a move here, so this would be immediately crushing, but he didn't consider such a move. So after b4, he played knight to e2, but even so, he thought that black doesn't really have anything to do here. b3 was played. b3, as you'll see in the game, is not the greatest of moves. Fabi thought that bishop to e7 was somewhat better, but even bishop to e7 falls to knight to e5. A greater move that no one even considered is actually bishop to g7, and it's interesting how such a move can be overlooked. It's a very strong defensive move, because now knight to e5, knight captures, now knight protects f7, and after pawn captures knight, queen c7 defends f7, and black is okay here. But it seems like a reasonably simple idea, but for some reason, obviously this is the geometry of the position is too strong here, obviously. So one can easily overlook a move like bishop to g7. It's hard to say, but okay. Akobian played b3. We have knight to e5 now, the queen is attacked, bishop captures, queen captures on f7 with check, king d8, and now pawn captures on e5. Now, as you recall from the previous position, it'd be better if the d file was, of course, open. Pawn captures on a2, and now king to d2. You have to move away the king, you can't allow a1 queen to come with check. Rook to f8, attacking the queen, queen captures on h7, and now rook captures on f1. Rook captures on f1 and d4. Akobian tries to give up the d4 pawn in hopes of playing queen captures on g2, after which the position would become drawn, as black would have a lot of drawing chances. But unfortunately for him, Fabi has queen to g8 check. We have king to c7, and only now knight captures on d4, but now the queen from g8 is also guarding g2. Queen to d5, and now queen captures on e6. Now Fabi doesn't mind trading queens, as he's up 2 pawns, and those are some very nice past g and past h pawn. Akobian declines this, queen a5 checks, c3, knight captures on e5. This does grab a pawn, but black is simply out of time. Here you're welcome to pause the video and try to find the continuation for black here. For white here, sorry. You know, just try to continue the attack. So feel free to do it. I will give it a couple seconds as usual for you to decide. For those of you who found the move, congratulations, you are once again an excellent attacker. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, here Fabi played rook to f7. So a nice rook sacrifice just to remove this knight from this nice dark square diagonal. There's really no good move here. Knight captures on f7 was played, and then comes bishop to f4 check. King to b7, and here Fabi simply played queen captures on f7, and in this position Varuzhan Akobian resigned the game. There really is no move here. The king has nowhere to go. This is guarded by the bishop, this is guarded by the queen. You can give up the bishop first, that really makes little sense. You can give up the queen, but then queen captures, this is mate in 1. And of course, if you go to b6, then queen to c7 will be checkmate, as the knight is covering the light squares here, even though only the b5 square is important for knight to cover. So yeah, a very nice win by Fabiano Caruana, and this puts him tied in the lead. But as I did prepare some standings, let's check them out. So this is one of the things I prepared. Let me just, sorry. This is, yeah, I also prepared the lifetime record between Fabiano Caruana and Varuzhan Akobian for you to check out. So in classical chess, it's 3-1 for Fabiano with 1 draw. So a nice lead for Fabiano, and including rapid exhibition games, it's 5-1 with 1 draw. So even including rapid exhibition games, Fabiano beat Akobian 2-0. But it's very interesting. The only win Akobian got against Fabiano Caruana was actually in last year's United States Championship, in the US Championship 2017. So this is basically a nice revenge by Fabi towards Varuzhan Akobian. Also, here are the standings after round 7. In first place tied we have Samuel Shankland with 3 wins, and Fabiano Caruana, the only one with 4 wins, but also with 1 loss. We have Wesley So in 3rd, and Zviad Izoria. Zviad Izoria now in 4th place, and he is the only player who beat Fabiano Caruana in this tournament, and the only player as well who beat Hikaru Nakamura in this tournament. So a very interesting player. Then Yaroslav Zerebuch, Alexander Lenderman, Varuzhan Akobian, Hikaru Nakamura, Jeffrey Shiong, Awonder Liang, Ray Robson, and Alexander Onishchuk in last place with 2 points. So yeah. Those were the standings, and also we have Fabi's next 4 opponents for his next 4 rounds. He will face Wesley So, Hikaru Nakamura, Zerebuch, and Onishchuk, and it's not gonna be an easy 4 rounds, but that's who he has to face if he wants to win this. And it will be very interesting if Fabi manages to win even the US Championship, because he already won the Candidates Tournament in Berlin, he won the Grenke Chess Classic, and now if he wins the US Championship, that's like that's a really good year. And then he's ready for November, and Fabi is definitely playing the best chess of his life. We're gonna have an excellent November, and you know, some great chess will be played there. I'm sure everyone is eagerly awaiting that. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Tony Mo at Guitar and Nickel and Dimming for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, hopefully with another interesting game. Thank you all.